Good evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 12 of WGU's College of IT's Dean's Fireside Chat Series. My name is Dr. Joe Derry. I'm the Dean and Vice President of Data Analytics, Computer Science, and Software Engineering here in the College of IT. Thank you for joining us this Wednesday evening. I hope everyone's doing well. Tonight's episode is entitled Discovering Your Data Destiny, a journey from biology to corporate data leadership. And we're really privileged to have our friend Veronica Durgan, who's here today. You know, Veronica is an experienced data analytics leader with over 2 decades of experience that we're going to hear a lot about tonight. Throughout her career, she's developed skills in database administration, data engineering, platform architecture, data modeling, analytics. I think we're going to put a ... There's a lot of things we could add to that list there. In her current role, she's the Vice President of Data at Saks, the premier luxury e-commerce platform. Veronica is responsible there for overall data strategy, driving enterprise digital transformation, looking at governing enterprise data, enabling and supporting data engineering and analytics and data science efforts. She's also a certified Data Vault practitioner, so we're going to be talking a little bit about what Data Vault is, and also a Snowflake data superhero, which is definitely something I feel you need a t-shirt for. She is passionate about her profession and sharing her knowledge, and we are absolutely thrilled to have her here tonight. And just a quick disclaimer before I say welcome. She's here under her own pretenses, her own opinions, things like that, not actually representing Saks tonight, so everything's based on her experiences and her thoughts. So Veronica, thank you for joining us this evening.
Oh my gosh, hi Joe, so happy to be here. I'm like, my whole thing should be just like data nerd. None of those big words or anything like that. Absolutely love data. So I'm really delighted. Thank you for having me here.
You are absolutely among friends. And as much as I like to usually say that I am out of the nerd phase of my life where I used to code till 3 o'clock in the morning, every time I say that, my wife hits me in the background and says, you are absolutely still that nerd.
Embrace you nerd. It's okay.
So tonight I'm really excited to dive into a couple of things when we have you. And I want to start really with that origin story that we referred to in the title. I'm always fascinated by the way that people found their way into data, whether that be with software engineering or whether it be with computer science or data analytics or mathematics or something. And I find that that background where folks came from usually really makes them who they are and kind of that unique thing that they bring to the table. So could you tell us a little bit about how you found your path? And maybe you could start with the fact that you were a biology major at one point.
Yeah, funny story, maybe not funny story. So, as I was growing up, my parents, I'm sure many can relate, were pushing me to medicine. Because every parent want their child to be either a doctor or a lawyer. So I kind of grew up studying, physics, biology, chemistry, um, but I kind of always just got math. Like even if you think about like genetics, I love genetics. It was very logical. So I'm like, okay, I'm going pre-med now. Mind you, this is like late 90s. I'm going to pre-med, so I went to college to get undergrad in biology. Um, and it was fine. Getting degree in medicine here is a very long time, and I believe that you have to be truly passionate to invest so much time into something like this. It's a very hard job, and I kind of wasn't really into it. So I took my biology classes. Funny story, I think Joe mentioned. We went to a marine biology lab one time, and I literally walked in. I'm like, this smells like fish. I want nothing to do with this. And like, of course it smells like fish. Um, so didn't really plan on proceeding. I still have an undergrad degree in biology, and I was at Northeastern at the time. And as you know, like if you're in Massachusetts, so Northeastern has this thing where you go to school for 2 quarters, right? And then you work for 2 quarters. So they actually placed me to process blood samples in a hospital lab. Can tell you everything you need to know about various types of tubes and why blood is put in different tubes. But as I was kind of working there, I transitioned into data entry. So they had terminals, and for some reason, the application made sense to me. So I was like easily navigating, entering data, and the woman that I worked with in the lab said, "My husband's looking for a computer operator. Would you like to?" I'm like, "Sure." I needed a job, I was going to college, needed to work kind of like to support myself. So I started working. That's where I discovered a little bit of data. So now, mind you, it's all mainframes back in the day. Um, Discovered Microsoft Access, super cool. I'm like, all right, awesome. I would also add that I took my very first programming class that I had to withdraw from because I was going to fail it. So the whole computer programming just didn't click at the time, but I kind of liked, whatever the little things that I was doing. So I still finished my undergrad in biology and was lucky enough, this was 2000. Everybody was looking for technical people and like you could get a job like with, I don't know, 5 seconds of learning something. So I was lucky enough to land my first job as a junior DBA. Fell in love with it. I was like, oh my God, I get it. I love it. I want to know more. I want to better. I want to figure out how to do this and that. And I realized that while I took a lot of different classes with my undergrad in biology, I was like, I need more. Like I was behind other people who had engineering degrees, but there was no data degrees at the time. So I ended up getting a degree in software engineering, which I've never like, I took programming classes at that time actually, loved it. So I guess the lesson here is like, if you don't like it the first time, try it again. You might love it later on. So got my degree as software engineer. I've never written software in my life. I worked with data through my entire career, but the classes that I took are still to this day incredibly valuable. I took project management. I took software development methodologies. It was technical writing. So every class, it wasn't data specific, but it still contributed to me succeeding in my role. So part of me is like, you don't necessarily have to have, like, we're all coming from different backgrounds into our roles, but what we learned somewhere else is actually contributing to the roles we're in. So that's kind of like a very long spiel about me.
It's really exciting though, and there's a bunch of different gold nuggets there that I want to kind of pick off one by one. And the first was kind of the serendipity of finding that original role, that placement from Northeastern, where you were going to collect the blood samples itself. Was there any hesitation at the time, or any, well, other than the fact it didn't smell like fish, I suppose, which a
Yeah,
little bit,
marine
little bit
biology,
different from that.
that was gonna be a straight, like that was not gonna happen.
Mhm,
I am honestly, so try first. Like I'm
mhm.
always open to try because interestingly enough, if I said no, right, I don't like I maybe I would have been doing research somewhere as like, I don't know, some low-level biologist or I don't know, or maybe I would have gone for PhD. Like I don't know, but take a chance, try it. The worst case scenario is you'll know for a fact you don't want to do it. And that's why I was like, why not? It's a job. It's something I've never done before. Let's give it a try. And it was not super exciting. I don't see myself processing blood samples for the rest of my working career.
So, I think that's great advice, though, because a lot of our students at WGU and potentially other folks that are watching today, whether they're students, alumni, prospective, or friends, may be coming into data professions from different pathways. So you came in through biology and then a placement that introduced you to the processing of data, which introduced you to a job working with computers and the DBA, and you kind of had this interesting chain of events that kicked off from that original externship. I found my way in by applying for data analyst role and then having the hiring manager reach out and say, hey, have you ever considered this thing called data scientist, which I did not feel qualified for at the time and had no idea what he was talking about. And what you're talking about, it's almost a leap of faith in a lot of
Mhm.
ways in trying something new, which brings me to the next gold nugget where you said that you took a programming class that you thought you were going to fail, but yet you were now a VP of data and you have a
Right.
degree in software engineering, and clearly something ticked for you there. So could you talk a little bit about what that experience was where you were originally experiencing programming, you were kind of coming into a failure, and how you got
Mhm.
back on that horse and ultimately opened up this entire world?
Yeah, it happens to me all the time. I think one of the things that I'll say, if you want to be in data, be prepared to learn all the time. things are changing like at the speed of light. There's constant stream of something new. And this kind of like, it happens to me all the time. I read a lot, and sometimes I don't get it on the first pass. And like the kind of like, I think the natural reaction at that point for many people is like, oh, I'm stupid, right? That's not the case. That's just how I learn differently. I process things differently. If it's intriguing, I try it again. And they're like, a lot of things intrigue me. Sometimes trying it multiple times, I still don't get it. And then I walk away. I forgive myself for not getting something. It's okay. But again, like I just curiosity. I walked into the programming class like literally the first time I've seen computers in my life. It wasn't the right stage in my life to try something like this. And I walked away. But it was
Mhm.
intriguing. It was interesting. A couple of years later, I was a little bit more prepared. I took it slow. I learn differently. I learn to understand. I don't learn to memorize. So it took me a while to understand, and then I walked in and I actually absolutely loved my programming classes. And to this day, absolutely love. I mean, SQL is not quite the programming language, but I still enjoy writing it very much.
I think there's a part of all of us that love SQL in some ways.
Mm.
And I love when you were talking about the learning to forgive yourself aspect as well too, and the fact that the first time you're experiencing some of these things, or maybe you're a professional in the data space, look at the evolutions of Gen AI right now and the fact that everything's changing. We're rethinking architectures because of it. We're
Mhm.
thinking business processes because of it, and the ground's shaking, but in a good way because it gives us opportunities. So I'm curious though. So with all these different roles that were leading up, so you had the DBA, the data processing, working with computers. You eventually went back and got the software engineering. Has having a lot of that hands-on keyboard experience helped you as you started to transition into these leadership roles?
I think for me, absolutely. Just kind of like self-discovery is a big thing. Like I'm very self-aware what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. The way my mind works is I have to understand for me to make a decision. So I don't rush into decisions. I don't, when I say I like, that's why it's like transformation is kind of what I love because I know what the final destination is and I know for a fact I can get there. So I kind of like march there step by step. So for me, having this hands-on experience where I truly got to learn and understand how things work, how data flows, what the implications are of well-designed systems, of poorly designed systems, how things interact. Like I think that prepared me for more of a, honestly leadership role. If you notice, even if you look at my career, I didn't step into like real leadership role until a couple of years ago. I
Hmm.
was he's on like drawing diagrams. I was in the principal role, engineer. Like I love it to this day. I still love coding actually because I have a couple hours between the time I kind of stopped with meetings and in this meeting I was actually writing some queries. So I love it. I enjoy it. I would love to continue doing it. So that's just again me personally. Not everybody's like that, but for me it's very important that I understand.
And I think that's very admirable as well to see a senior leader that still is willing to roll up your sleeves and get into the code and actually experience the data on that level. And I think that's something that a lot of teams really respect as well. And I personally love to find every opportunity I can to code
Yeah.
still. And I still think I will find a way to get through Twitter. Now X is rate limiting, but we'll figure that out a different day. I'm curious, you talked about transformation in this conversation too. And what is it that you mean by transformation?
So what I mean by that is taking, I know I'm laughing. Um, I'm at the point in my career where I've kind of been like around long enough that I've seen bad things and I know how good things work. So I generally lean towards role when I can walk in into legacy or poorly designed thing, and then I re-architect it in the better way. So to me, that's transformational. It's kind of like technologically wise, like hands-on engineering. The other transformational part that I enjoy is building data culture. Like I'm not like a formal evangel, whatever the new roles are. but I really enjoy engaging people, like spread my love for data, I guess is the best way to describe it. So like you see my like I am truly excited. Like I love it. And everybody I talk to, I'm trying to get them. I'm like, you have to do data. Data is amazing. So kind of like building that culture and that excitement around data and having this like, shining like bright eyes when somebody's like, oh my God, I can do something now that I couldn't do before. And it helps me in my career or in my job. That's the other part of transformation that I really enjoy.
There's a lot of people on the call right now and potentially watching the video recording a little later that are thinking, God, how am I going to find a way to work for Veronica with all of that excitement?
I know it's like
Is
the
what they're
energy
thinking.
is like, I know my team's like but it's good. Like somebody gave me feedback which was kind of incredible. Like they're like, you're like 5 steps ahead of us. I'm like, yes, I am. That's why I have you to kind of like pull me back when necessary. But I'm like, I'm ready to go.
But I love that futures thinking. And the reason I picked up on transformation in particular was I love seeing data leaders that have gone from being hands on keyboard to managing a team to leading to eventually merging into this digital transformation space. Because to your point, it's about the journey for a lot of these things. And it's not enough just to have the data or an accurate model or an interesting product, but how do you bring all those things together and really transform the way the business works and the way they think and the way they consume this information? So when you started talking about transformation with the excite that you bring, and I'm thinking about Five Dynamics right now and the fact that you're high excite, that becomes almost a sales pitch and a story in a lot of ways. So before I get into some of the more technical parts of the conversation, could you talk a little bit about how storytelling, change management, kind of those softer skills come into the role that you have today?
Um, Absolute, super important. I think one of the greatest things I took some training from something Harvard Business School put together. I'm sorry, like completely don't remember the name, but one of the um, case stories that we learned was about basically understand deeply, explain simply. If you can figure this out, you will do so well. We're like engineers. I'm sure all of you have spoken to engineers before. They truly, like, they're smart. They truly get it. But if they can't explain what they're doing, why they're doing it to a regular non-engineer, and mind you, not like you're not automatically stupid if you're not an engineer. That's not the case. Like, to some other smart people that are not engineers, there's no like you don't succeed, you don't deliver value, you get into this interesting conversation, kind of like almost like speaking foreign language to each other. You're like in the same room and you're like talking at each other, but neither person gets it. So these soft skills are incredibly important. Tech, you can learn if you get it, learning will be easier and you'll probably move faster, but you can learn. Being able to understand and explain and communicate with people is something like if it comes naturally to you, you are lucky. Others will have to keep practicing.
And I think that's the true unicorn in a lot of ways that's emerged in the data space are the folks that can balance the left brain technical and the right brain creative. And I was giving a guest lecture earlier in the week, and one of the students asked me if I'm not good at communicating to non-technical folk, what kind of strategies or tips would you have? And I'll offer one, the advice I gave, and then I'd love to hear from you as well. Mine was actually just telling a story without the data. So actually trying to tell it, whether it's like a bedtime story or anything, but take all the data out, take all the statistics out, and really discipline yourself to tell the story without any of those components, bring in that excite. And then you can go back in and you can think about, okay, where does the data make sense to add? Should I add a statistic here or a statistic there? But if you can successfully tell a story that is compelling and drives passion and gets people excited without having data or math in that story, then you've mastered it. You've figured it out. You're not going to alienate, and then you can go back. Do you have any tips or tricks that you might want to share with some of the folks that are listening around what they could do if they don't feel confident in talking to a non-technical audience?
It's funny. Program manager that works with me always says, "Give me the Fisher Price version." I think it's kind of silly, like explain it to like a 5-year-old. I think explain it to your mom or your dad or some older family member, if you can explain it in the way that they get it, and and then just step up, right? Like people that you're talking with at work, your peers, they know more than your parents who are not in the same area at all and potentially don't even like. My mom has no clue what I do, but like trying to explain it to her in just a logical step-by-step way, I think kind of being maybe like giving practical advice. Presentations and demos are great way to learn, because then keep an eye out on people in front of you. If they like glaze over, you lost them. Like that's it. As simple as that. Like, and I work with my team. This isn't. It's hard. Like Joe, you're like incredibly smart. You know a lot. You can have like really like you could probably use big words that some people have to look up. Um, so it's hard to kind of like change the way you explain so that it kind of like matches the average person, right? But we work with people that are different, and like that's totally okay. So make it simple. Draw diagrams. That's another thing. Draw pictures, boxes, lines. People get it. I am like every time I pull up a chair, I'm like, let me draw some boxes for you. It's very therapeutic too. And then like this is how this connects. This is what happens. Just a logical, basic step by step, and then add details. Again, depending on the audience, if you're presenting to Joe there, you'll probably want some details, and he'll call you out if you trying to sell him something that isn't good. But again, in general, in business, when you work like for regular companies, you need to like be very simple, tell a very logical story from the beginning to the end, and keep an eye out on your audience.
You know, there's so many, you're just adding to the gold nuggets list that's coming here. There's a few things that came to my mind. The first is a lot of times in the business context, folks trust that you are doing things correctly and accurately, and they're not necessarily going to question the code that you wrote unless you're talking to somebody who is a technical SME. So they're assuming when you go in, they already give you that trust out of the gate. So in your story, you don't necessarily need to go into those weeds of, these are every single step I took, all the lines of code that I wrote. This is why it's, you know, this is how I validated and tested and so forth. Most of the time, they're actually giving you that trust unless you had a project that went south in the past and you have to rebuild that brand. So that's the first thing. You don't always have to prove that in the business context. And again, this comes back to knowing your audience that you mentioned. But I, in particular, love when you talked about drawing and finding other ways to communicate. So for some folks that may not, they may struggle with writing emails or putting different things together. You can definitely draw pictures, even in the virtual world. I keep a remarkable tablet that's here too that I can screen share on my desktop. And I love to draw pictures. I love to draw slides. I love to draw things out and then share that with people. Um, so find what works for you. Find your medium. Find your easel, if you will, kind of from an art more perspective there, and that will enable you to move forward. So at this point, I want to transition a little bit into the more technical, but just a quick little announcement for everyone who's watching live tonight. There is a Q&A portion that's going to be coming up in a little bit where you get to ask Veronica questions that are on your minds. You'll see in the bottom right-hand corner of the WebEx event that there's a Q&A button that's there. You can click on that, throw your questions in, and our moderator, Jory, will be going through those when we get to the Q&A section. So start thinking about what you'd like to ask Veronica and get those questions into the chat. So
Visitor.
you got a visitor?
I got a visitor. He's hovering.
Veronica and I were talking earlier about having our kids join us on the fireside chat as well too, and I can feel my dog running around my feet right now as I'm standing up, but I think my 3-year-old and 5-year-old are finally sleeping. So, what visitors are always welcome. So from a technical perspective, I'd love to dive into some of the things that you've been very passionate about and what you've talked about in the past and some of your other keynotes that you've had and LinkedIn presentations. And I want to start with data modeling in particular.
Mhm.
So could you talk to us about what the importance of data modeling is and why you are an advocate and the certified person around Data Vault? And I'm sure there are some people that are on the call thinking, what is Data Vault? Is that a game from Hasbro? Is that, you know,
It's
an
a
escape
cool
room?
name.
Is
Like you
that
have to give it that. It's a cool name. I'll start with why data modeling. So
okay?
the best way to describe it, data modeling is like an organized kitchen. So if you walk into a kitchen that nothing is organized in a meaningful way, can you make dinner? Probably, but it'll maybe take you 2 hours to find all the ingredients you're looking for, or maybe longer, or maybe you won't even find it. So a well-designed data model is like a well-organized and stocked kitchen. And I'll take it a step further because my husband has a little bit of OCD. He rotates cans by expiration date. So
It's
it's
impressive.
and that's why you will never take a can that's bad because it's in the back of the cabinet, right? So this is like taking your data model from good to really good. So you're a chef, you're a data chef, and we can go to a bunch of different analogies, but a data model is a well stocked and organized kitchen so that you can take any recipe and you can make it and you can also easily substitute, right? So that's kind of like how I think about it. Why Data Vault? I actually at some point was thinking about writing something like why Data Vault fits my personality. Um, so I transit. So the easiest way to describe, which is maybe not easy if many of you are just stepping into data. So data, like if you remember, data lakes were a big thing. Data lake. So basically, what data lake is, you take data from somewhere and you just dump it. So think of your unorganized kitchen. Like you have everything, you just don't know where it is. So Data Vault adds layer of organization. So you still have all of your data. You don't overwrite anything, but it's organized. I absolutely love it. I was a DBA. The biggest horror that I've ever had was when like, oh, just quickly update this data or just delete it. And then like 20 minutes later, oh my God, can you get it back? So Data Vault stores data very historical, it's auditable, all the changes are tracked. So for me, it just gives me peace of mind that if I mess up, I always have a backup plan. That's another thing that always worked for me. Always have a plan B, whether it's a rollback or fix. Like think through as you design, if you create things, especially if they're like distractive. Um, think of plan B because if disaster strikes, you already know what to do. You don't have to get anxious or nervous and try to figure out how to fix it. So.
And I love the metaphor of the kitchen that you've been using as well too. And I need to invite you and your husband over so he can take a look at the cans in
Organize
my
your
cabinet as
cabinets.
well
Yeah.
too. But the thing that I'm really interested in is this notion of change. And for those of you that haven't worked in the audience in a corporate ecosystem before, the only constant thing that you can really rely on is change.
Mhm.
And in a lot of ways, it's Murphy's Law. What's going to go wrong is going to go wrong, right? So Data Vault gives you an opportunity to be able to put an architecture in place, or a data model in this case, that accounts for the fact that you're going to see that change. But there are also some things that could cause people heartburn. And Veronica, as I was mentioning earlier, I had a conversation with someone earlier today around some of the things that give folks pause about Data Vault in
Mhm.
particular. And it was really around the fact that that design tends to blow out the number of tables that you have. And if you try to do BI and reporting directly from that, it can run a large compute bill because of the number of joins and the complexity of joins that you end up doing there. So how do you respond to that notion that it's going to blow out the data and it's not going to be efficient for BI in some cases?
Sure. Couple of things. So joining tables, it's normalization. You normalize data for optimization for writes,
Mhm.
period. If your data is organized and indexed appropriately, joins are not expensive. Just this is my DBA talking with my hands, just to make sure I make a point. So this notion of like joining multiple tables is bad. It's not. It's how you actually design those tables. The other side of it is you don't actually put BI tools on top of Data Vault. Again, think Data Vault is really just kind of like storage that's organized by business concept. What happens is you put then kind of like what we call information marts layer on top of it. And that's when you create your objects that are friendly for BI. The cool thing about it, this is also where your business rules live. So talking about change, businesses grow, they change how they look at KPIs, how they calculate them, because you store data in very much an auditable, you store every change, you capture every change. You can always recalculate your information marks and KPIs. You can redesign, you can recreate, you can reload. because you have all the data. So there are a few things. Now, having said that, Data Vault is not for everything. This is where kind of as you grow into this data space, some people are very kind of like, I know this, I can make this work, this is the only way. That's not true. I've seen dimensional models that were great. I've seen dimensional models that were horrible. I've seen no modeling that was worked until it didn't. Data Vault is very much the same. It's really entirely up to you and your team, how you implement your model, how you kind of like, implement your change management, your, software development practices. So data ops, right? Like we're taking from our software peers, they've done it for a while. We're finally like, how can we do it? How can we make sure our code's reliable, reproducible, automatable, and etc. So I love it. Meets my personality, satisfies all the check boxes, but it's not the only thing.
No, and I love that because hopefully it's getting folks thinking around, it's all about what is relevant to that particular business case or problem that you're trying to solve. The fact that you may have a couple of different layers of solutioning based on whether you're organizing and managing the data or putting something in front of a salesperson that needs a certain latency, and you can address these as part of that larger ecosystem. You also mentioned business rules, which I want to touch on in a second, but before that, you mentioned data lakes. And I know that there are still some companies that use them, and
Mhm.
some companies are using lake houses now, and at some point there'll be like a condo maybe or a townhome or seems like everyone's in
Boat
a rat
house.
race. I've seen boathouse. Everyone on the call right now that's not used to this is thinking that we're probably making these up, but these are all hybrid architectures and hybrid ecosystems in a lot of ways, and folks are trying to quickly get to a name that's going to stick, that's going to dominate the social sphere. But what I'm curious though is, where is that line between data lake and data swamp? So you mentioned that disorganized kitchen before. I'm thinking of an episode of Hoarders potentially.
Mhm.
How do you how do you walk that line if you're a company that uses a data lake and you're trying to prevent a swamp from occurring?
I honestly don't know. I've never walked into a data swamp before. So I I walked, so it's funny, I joke, I've been doing this since 1999, and the reason I say 1999 because I lived through the Y2K bug, which is quite a fascinating experience. Uh, I avoided Hadoop completely. I kind of walked around like, oh, relational database, OLTP
Hmm.
for transactional, so it's like normalized data, appropriate indexes, and then I walked into dimensional warehouse, which was also organized, had its issues because you lose data in transformation, kind of going back to my point, like if
Hmm.
your business rule change, if your source systems don't have historical data, you can't reproduce anything. And then I kind of walked into Snowflake as a platform, which I love. And by the way, I'm a data superhero and I have a cape, and Data Vault. I bypassed the whole swamp. So I'm like, I'm lucky in that way. I didn't have to deal with it. Storing data for the sake of storing, not knowing what's there, writing massive, what are they called, map reduce jobs that timed out. Like I just aggressively avoided that situation, and went a different path.
Well, I am envious of you in that case. But for those of you that may be coming against that scenario, or you may see that, kind of like that disorganized kitchen that Veronica was talking about earlier, how does the business rule definition, in particular more governance, start to play into these environments? And in particular, how do you find a balance between governance and innovation?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's like I'll give you the it depends situation. That's the thing it's like, oh, she's so snobby. Just it depends and walk away. I believe in innovation. I love it. I want for my team to kind of be aware of what's happening. I'm also a little bit conservative. Joe, I don't know if you'll get it, but like I wait until Service Pack 1. So this whole LLM AI, I was like, I'll just wait. I'll let others test it out. I think specifically for innovation, just a safety space it's almost like a lab. It's a lab experiment, try it out, play around. When you're ready and you're like, this is amazing, this is providing value, we're solving a problem we couldn't before, or this is a potential stream of revenue for the company, then it goes through the process. It has to go through the process. I lived my entire career saying that I was a bottleneck until those, cases periodically happened when we prevented a disaster.
Mhm.
And it's like, it's okay. Governance, security, it's the cost of doing business. To give you I love analogies. I'm like, would you leave the door open to your house or actually not even have a door? No, you have a door. It's part of your kind of like security. Before you walk into my house, you have to knock on the door and I have to unlock it, right? Because if you don't have it, then like anybody could walk, including animals, wild animals. Do you want raccoons in your messy kitchen? Probably not.
Yeah, I think that's when it's becoming the swamp is probably what's happening. You got an alligator in there or something, but no, I think that's a great answer. And the it depends is totally relevant. And I think the big takeaway for the folks that are listening is it's understanding the business context, it's understanding the ecosystem that you have access to and the institutional norms and practices that you put in place. And once you understand those, you can make an assessment and move forward.
Yeah.
So I have two questions left before we move to the Q&A. So again, anyone who's listening, this is your chance. I see a couple of questions starting to get in there. Make sure you're entering those if you want to hear from Veronica directly. So in our chat a couple of weeks ago, we were talking a little bit about architectural thinking in particular too. And you mentioned earlier in this conversation being 5 steps ahead in a way that's kind of futures thinking. What is architectural thinking and why does thinking about the future, especially in an environment of change, matter so much?
Yeah. For me, architectural thinking is generally how I think about it is floating above the immediate problem that's in front of you and understanding how things connect with each other because your solution will be different depending on the implications of that. And I know oftentimes we get so stuck with solving the immediate problem that's in front of us. The reality is that like the time it takes you to solve the immediate problem will probably be the same as the time it takes you to build something that is resilient and reliable, and you don't have to do it again. We have to, with data's changing so much, like the space, the tooling, we have to think of kind of like future proofing our platforms. And I don't mean that we buy a tool, we chatted about SAP,
Mhm.
we buy a tool and we're stuck with it for 20 years. This is actually the opposite. We want to build our systems in a way that are more like Legos, where you can take one piece out and you can replace it with another one. And that requires truly to float above and to see the entire picture and how things connect. So kind of like logically high level, draw it out, think through it, think how data flows through your ecosystem. Think about data SLAs. That was another great conversation we had before. Like you had a need to report on like sub-second real-time data. How you design for that is not the same of how you design for something that you either need to aggregate terabytes and terabytes of data for, or something that only needs to be refreshed once an hour. So there's all these decisions that you have to make, and you really need to understand how things work end to end, and also your company teams. It's not just tech, it's not just your engineering skills. You need to understand the culture of your company, how they operate. Are they chasing after the new shiny, or do they prefer to build everything in-house? How strong are their teams? What do those teams know, what their skill sets are? So kind of like all of that is comes into play when you architect whatever it is you're building, and then you start kind of like working on components.
You know what I love so much about this conversation, and I hope folks that are listening are noticing this too. To be a leader in this space is so much more than just about the programming and the code and the technical components. There's the vision component, it's the storytelling, it's the excite that you bring. It's being able to connect the dots across to understand where the company's going and how you're going to need to be able to enable that with what you're building. And having that flexibility and agility, you talked about the Lego approach, so the modular design,
Mm.
and just being able to step away from what could have been potentially institutional norms or assumptions that may have been around. It's not uncommon to go into a company and see, a data architecture that's 20 years old, to your point, where they've been using the same vendor, the same style, the same design forever, and there's hesitation to where to go from there. But if you can come in with this vision and a lot of these business influence skills, that's what's needed to really define that
Yeah,
successful leader.
100%. Yep.
So last question before we go over to the Q&A. When you're thinking about building a team today, and I'm sure that, again, there's a lot of folks that are like, how am I going to be able to work for Veronica? What are you thinking about from design principles in terms of the teams that you build? What are you looking for?
So specifically, when maybe less of team of like of a personality. When I interview, I hate those tests. I just, you have to walk me through logically, and I through any solution, and I don't even honestly care whether it's right or wrong. I will ask questions if like somebody's going completely down like weird path, like I'll kind of push them towards where I'd like them to go. But to your point earlier, telling a story, tell me a story, walk me through your thinking, and explain it to me in a way that I understand. So that's the main. Occasionally we, again, from teams. So let me take a step back, kind of like think architecturally. And if you heard my latest podcast, my entire team needs to be unicorn. So my entire team, everybody together, we all collectively need to be perfect. So as I kind of like start filling in roles, we all have our strengths. Nobody's perfect. Totally cool. But I need to fill in like the gaps, right? Like I know what I'm good at. You clearly see I'm like, oh, let's go. I need somebody to pull me back. Like, okay, chill. We can't walk this fast. So find that balance across the entire team. But for personality specifically, to me, it's curiosity, self-starter, and like logically walk me through your thinking. I don't care if you know. I don't care if you're wrong. Walk me through your logic. Like we'll have a very meaningful conversation. I don't care if you know this model or that model. There's like so many, probably more to come. So that's kind of how I look. Maybe I'm like, maybe I'm unique in this case, but I absolutely hate standard tests. Just hate them.
No, you're definitely not unique, and I very much appreciate everything you said. To me, it's all about the story too. Understanding how somebody thinks. I used to love in interviews to ask people to whiteboard to show me their thinking.
Mhm.
And to your point, it didn't matter if you were right or wrong. It was, what threads are you pulling on? How are you organizing your thoughts? And how would you basically approach a business problem if you were on the team? Because we don't know what business problem is coming or what technology or technique is going to be available at that point in time. Folks today weren't really thinking about generative AI 2 years ago. Well, some were, but most weren't.
Mhm.
And, still today, a decision tree may solve a particular problem for all we know. You use what's applicable, and sometimes the tried and true methods, the bread and butter of analytics,
Mhm.
still works.
Yep.
So I see a bunch of stuff coming into the Q&A here. So Jory, do you want to read off some of these?
Certainly.
Thank
Kind
you.
of going off of conversation that you were talking about assets to your team, we have a question that as a transition from one career to another, they are pursuing their bachelor's in data analytics degree. How can they position themselves as an asset to a team despite lacking direct experience in data analytics?
Um, I'll kind of start for when you just first going into something that you've never done before. Again, when I interview kind of like for more junior roles, what I'm looking from you is to tell me a story, how you worked on the project, what questions you answered with that project, what insights you gained. And then the question I ask next is, what else would you like to know about this? Did you have a question in your mind that you couldn't answer? Because to me now it's telling me that you had a data set, but you want more. You want to learn about something else. So curiosity, and I think a big thing is self-starter. Self-starter, look for things, bring it up. Don't wait for somebody to tell you. I know many teams, depending on like which team you work, some have more organized process, others don't. But it's kind of like that. And I think honestly, like I'm probably projecting in a way. It works for me. I'm just naturally curious. I want to know more. So it worked for me in my career. Kind of like trying to know more. So I'm going to project that on you and say, just be self-starter, be curious, ask questions, learn, ask for help. Another great thing that we seem to probably comes from a place that we feel like we have to know, like the imposter syndrome, right? We're afraid to ask questions. More senior people love when you come for advice. We all love to give advice. Ask. You will get help, you'll get experience, and here you are. Next job will be much easier.
From the curiosity angle too, just to add one thing that's there. When I used to mentor folks and from an interviewing perspective, I used to always say that your objective is to try to figure out the business problem that the interviewer is trying to solve. And if you can go in with that curiosity and you can ask those questions and you can showcase how you think, if you can actually get to what their business problem is in that session and you can start talking about and starting to ideate, if you're having a great conversation and you leave the room and they don't call you back, they've lost that in a lot of ways. So it's a great way to hook back in. So just kind of putting in perspective, if you can do some of these things, show that way of thinking, come in curious, leverage other experiences that you had. I was able to secure a data analyst role when I was first out of college. And the big differentiator that I had was the hiring manager loved the fact I was a bartender and actually gave me that feedback after the fact. And they were like, the fact that you came in and you had bartending experience, and I feel like you could sit down and have a conversation with someone out of nowhere, I think our stakeholders will like you.
Yeah.
So
I would say, just to double click on the stakeholder management, it's very important that you actually understand what somebody on the other side is asking you to do. So many times we make assumptions, we're afraid to ask, and constant feedback loop. You've built something, show it, ask for feedback. It's like over and over again, oh, I've built something, I presented, they said, no, that's not what they wanted. Like, you can avoid that. Just it's like iterative process, agility, and I'm throwing more terms at you, but like just constant, kind of like involve whoever you're working with or whoever presented a task to you, involve them. Maybe they'll, help you decide on something. They'll feel special that they're involved, and you'll be better at actually delivering what they're looking for.
Jory, do we have something else?
Absolutely. Lots of questions coming in this evening. For Veronica, what are some of the most significant challenges you've faced in your career, and how did you overcome them?
Um, I think honestly, working with people is probably always the biggest challenge. Not in a bad way, but we're all different. We have different things going on in our lives. As you go through your career, at some point you get to a point where your manager might feel threatened by you. So I think this is honestly the constant and the biggest challenge. We work together, we have to communicate with each other, and we're all humans, we have emotions. So that's kind of like a balance that's harder. Technology easy, coding is easy. That's not a problem. Fixing, replatforming, even data modeling is easy from technological perspective, but actually having conversation with another human, that's where like real challenge is.
Thank you. We have a question. With your deep tech background as a DBA, how does this experience shape your perspective as a leader of a data team?
I feel that every data person has to be DBA to have appreciation, one, for everything you build from now on that somebody else has to support, and B, for well-designed systems that don't break. Like, I'm just gonna go out and say everybody should be DBA for a little bit. True appreciation. I was lucky enough to work with some brilliant people. I learned a ton, and I know newer kind of like population of data specialists walked into startups. There's nobody, so they don't get that level of learning that I was lucky enough to experience. And again, like, just the appreciation. We oftentimes build something, throw it over the fence to somebody else to support, and it breaks all the time. And on top of that, it breaks, and then they can't fix it because it's not architected well. So if you haven't been on the other side, you won't have appreciation. So like for me, I ask for simple design. I push for elegant solution. I push for simple, simplicity, for being modular, for not adding hard dependencies. This is kind of like where architecture comes in, right? Like, can we make robots actually do work for us in this case? I don't want to be paged in the middle of the night. So this is where robots are helpful. Create a process that's self-recovering, that reruns by itself, that does whatever, so that I, a human, sleep in the middle of the night.
And I think the one takeaway from Veronica being a DBA is if you work for her, you better make sure your queries are optimized before you
Oh
hire.
my gosh, yes. Query optimization is my jam.
All right. Is Data Vault similar to data visualization? And what is the difference between Data Vault versus Data Mesh?
Okay, so Data Vault is your organized kitchen. Data visualization is the meal that you cooked. So Data Vault is all the ingredients, all your data that's organized in a business-focused sort of way. I'm trying to figure out an example. For example, you work for car manufacturing, right? You'll have all of your supplier data organized, kind of like by itself. You have all of your car, what are they called, bill of lading parts in one space. You can put those two together, but you know exactly where to go to get specific data. So again, Data Vault is kind of like a method of a data warehousing of how you store data. Data mesh is different. Data mesh helps large organizations connect, think of like various data vaults and data lakes, wherever they store their data together. So not inclusive, exclusive, could be mix and match, depending on the size of the org, maturity of the org, depending if you get a data leader who's practically pragmatic or somebody who just loves all the new stuff. So it's like you'll walk into all kinds of different situations as you start working with data. All great experiences, yeah.
I'm excited to see how much further we can take this kitchen metaphor this evening.
Chicken soup. Chicken soup was my other.
I was thinking food stylist when I heard visualization too. You know, somebody who's trying to give the emerald bam on that dish at the end.
It's the what does your chicken soup have noodles in it? That's visualization, right? But chicken in the fridge, noodles in the box or not, you add potatoes. I've been schooled on chicken soup. I did this analogy of chicken soup and data platform. Somebody schooled me on chicken soup. Also, kind of perfect is not necessary.
Mm.
You don't have to put a whole organic chicken in your soup. All you need a bunch of bones. So that's another great example that oftentimes close enough on the first pass and just a lot of iterations and feedback is important.
Love that. Love that.
You have me giggling over here at these analogies. It's fantastic. This is a good one. This person came from a general physical science and then engineering background and then became increasingly more specific in education. I felt a general undergraduate degree served me very well. However, the trend in higher ed has been to become more niche at the undergraduate level. If you had to do it again, would you have started more specific or stayed general at the start?
That's a great question. I would say I don't think I would have gone specific. I probably would have leaned towards more of kind of like maybe like a computer science degree, but I still would take all the classes I could. One of my absolute favorite classes in my undergrad degree was economics, actually. I met an amazing professor. I loved her. She was incredible. Great class. Still in my I still remember things she taught. So it's I I don't think that undergraduate degree really gives you enough of a deep knowledge. So I think undergrad degrees are usually a great opportunity to try and learn about like a lot of different things. Because again, as an 18, 19, 20-year-old, you have no clue. Like you don't know. Like you just don't know because you haven't tried it. And like to me, like working in the lab, I would have never, like in a million years, say, I want to process blood in the lab. But I've tried it. So you don't know where your journey will take you. So try things when you have a chance, because that's when you actually start narrowing down into things that you get and you enjoy and you actually want to do for a very long career, because we all have to work for many, many years.
Love that. So for the last question before we wrap up, I'm actually going to take that one. And you mentioned Gen AI at one point, and it's the shiny thing at the moment. I'm curious of your perspective of, do you think companies are dropping the ball at all when it comes to generative AI and how they're trying to deploy it?
I think, how do you define dropping the ball? So
Loaded question.
what I would say, Gen AI, so to me, they're almost like two different types. There's LLMs, Gen AI from as a tool. So company are bringing those in, they're built by third-party vendors. They're fine, they're just like any software. And then there's a part where companies use their own data. And I think in that case, a lot of companies are missing the fact that their data is a mess because crap in, crap out, pardon my French. You have to, this is where your architecture and your data management and your modeling is so important. Companies that have done this in the past few years, they're well positioned to start using LLMs, machine learning, just any data science on their data for their competitive advantage. The rest of the companies are going to go through the same flop as data science has gone through in like 5 years, where they hired a bunch of data scientists who couldn't deliver anything because they didn't have quality data to work with.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It seems that so many people get excited about it. Now, granted, I love the fact that there is this much excitement about the analytics space in general and the data space in general, but we can't forget the basics
Mhm.
and the fact that if you don't have the well-organized data model, if you haven't thought through this and what the ecosystem needs to look like and what tools and functionality you need, and then also business process as well, can your business even support the deployment of some of these things? Then you end up with that flash in the pan that we've seen so many times when Random Forest was really excited, and then neural networks came back at one point and were really excited. And then you had these self-service BI dashboards that everyone was excited about. But at the end of the day, to your point, and I speak French as well, apparently, it was kind of crap in, crap out.
So next Fireside Chat is in French.
I don't know if we're going to be broadcasting that one. So Veronica, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you with us today. So everyone, thank you very much for joining this evening. I know it's late on a Wednesday night. I hope you got some gold nuggets out of this night's discussion, and I really appreciate that you joined us for episode 12. We'll be back in the new year with episode 13, and we have some great guests lined up for 2024. But again, thank you to Veronica Durgan, who is the VP of Data at Saks, a true data enthusiast, we'll call it that, and somebody who we are always happy to nerd out with. Thanks, Veronica.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, everyone, for your amazing questions.
Awesome. Have a great night, everyone. Take care.